The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. This Wednesday, market volatility is continuing. You know, the last hour of the day, I think the Dow rallied better than 300 points. It was down maybe 150, 200, ended up closing up about 150 points, even bigger percentage gains in the NASDAQ. So we had maybe a lot of short covering in the last hour, maybe some people bottom fishing in the market. Are the lows of this correction in? I tend to doubt it. I mean, technically the market still looks like it wants to go lower, although it might be kind of ironic if we did see the lows based on Greenspan's testimony yesterday. After all, this big decline in equities really started when Ben Bernanke launched Operation Twist. Is it possible that the market bottomed out when he basically acknowledged the fact that QE3 is coming, even though he didn't come out and state it that it's 100% certainty? Basically, if you listen to that meeting, he not only opened the door for QE3, he pretty much let everybody know that it's wide open. So is it possible that the Fed chairman marked both the high and the low? I suppose, but I tend to doubt that the market's going to bottom that quickly. The Dow is up again this morning. It's been plus and minus. It's now up about 25 points. Gold and silver are relatively flat. The dollar is down on the day pretty much across the board, although the dollar decline started in the last hour of trading yesterday when the stock market rallied. So again, you see the stock market up, the dollar down. Treasuries also fell sharply at the end of the day yesterday. They're down sharply again today, but we're still, below 3%. We're about 2.87 on the 30-year. We were at 2.7, I think, yesterday when I did the show. That's the 30-year. The 10-year is about 1.9, substantially above the low from yesterday, which I think was about 1.7. But still, the yields are extremely low by any historic measures. They're just not as low as they were yesterday morning. We'll see what happens as the day progresses. Gold stocks coming up just a little bit today. 2.5% move higher on the Huey. I mean, these stocks really got hammered yesterday. And a lot of them were down this morning. They look like they're making pretty good reversals now, so potentially this could be a reversal day. There is some positive news. I'm reading a news story from the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Qatar. They're basically looking at this story. They're announcing their intention to spend $10 billion on gold out of their sovereign wealth fund. That's a lot of money, and a lot of it they're saying is going to go into gold mining stocks, which is something I've been forecasting would happen for a long time. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of these sovereign wealth funds that want to buy gold but don't want to push up the price in the process, that an easy way to do that is to buy some of the mining stocks, because then you're in effect buying all the gold that is in the ground, but you're buying it at a discounted price. So I have expected stuff like this to happen, and maybe this announcement, although I don't know why they would announce their intention prior to doing their buying. You'd think they'd want to get the cheapest prices possible, and potentially letting people know that they're planning on buying might end up paying a higher price. But they certainly have had a pretty good pullback recently, so they're going to get good value either way. I wanted to talk too a little bit about Ben Bernanke's testimony yesterday. We got to talk about it in small part, but I had a chance to read more of what Ben Bernanke said. And to me, what I think he's doing is he's really trying to lay a foundation politically for QE3. I think that had he just launched QE3 rather than Operation Twist right away, he would have been doing it with gold at $1,900 an ounce. He would have been doing it with the dollar index near record lows and the dollar, getting killed against other currencies. He would have done it with crude oil, around $90 a barrel. So I think the Fed chairman knew that it would be very difficult to launch QE3 at that moment in time. So he basically pulled the rug out from under the people who were expecting it, did Operation Twist instead. And, gold prices dropped sharply, oil prices dropped, commodity prices dropped. And I think this has now created an environment for Ben Bernanke to say, look, There is no inflation. Look at commodity prices falling. Look at the dollar rising. And now under that cover, under that smoke screen, it makes it easier for him to launch QE3 without the protests that he would have had he done it at a time when the dollar was weaker and commodity prices were higher. Now, I think that the commodity prices and the dollar will have an abrupt U-turn and quickly, reverse the moves of the last month is the minute that he announces that. But he's bought himself some breathing room. I don't think he's going to get as much air as he thinks, because I think the market will move very sharply in the other direction. But a lot of people, still think there's no inflation. I'm listening. Here's a Republican congressman who was speaking, I guess, in a press conference following the Bernanke conference. This guy is Representative Mulvaney. I'm just reading a quote that he said, and he said, how are we supposed to say, look, inflation is killing us when it's not yet? And that is the problem. I mean, Ben Bernanke can claim, hey, all this money printing, look, there is no inflation. The problem is the inflation is the money printing. The rising prices, that is the result of all the money printing, and there could be a lag. I mean, sometimes there could be a big lag between the inflation and prices going up. Now, and also part of the problem is prices should be falling. The economy needs deflation. I mean, that's what we need. That's part of the healing process. So the fact that the Fed is creating so much inflation that it's preventing prices from coming down, that is preventing the economy from recovering. I mean, if people aren't buying things, it's because the prices are too high. And the way to get people to buy, right, is to let prices come down, particularly wages. I mean, people aren't hiring because wages are too high. Wages have to come down, but none of that is happening. The Fed is preventing deflation with all this inflation, and that is inhibiting a restructuring and a recovery from the economy. But prices are actually rising, too. It's just that the CPI is not fully capturing the true rate of increase. But by the time it does, the problem is it's too late for the Fed to do anything about it. And then is the Fed really going to abruptly apply the brakes when the country is that much more indebted, that much more addicted to cheap money? No, I mean, the longer the Fed waits to put on the brakes, the less likely it is it's going to do it, and the more likely it is we're going to crash. And even if we don't crash, slamming on the brakes from a much faster speed is going to produce that much more of a violent reaction in the economy, which I think it is going to do. Also, I want to talk a little bit too about the Occupy Wall Street movement, and kind of contrast that with the Tea Party. And to me, it looks like we've got now two opposite ends of the spectrum being represented by these two rather vocal groups. The question is, will the Occupy Wall Street movement continue to grow in opposition to the Tea Party movement, kind of represent the opposite end of the spectrum? But we'll be back with more of the show on your phone calls, 855-4SHIFT. If you want to call 855-4SHIFT, we will be right back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Hey, before I actually talk a little bit about, this Occupy Wall Street, I forgot we did get some economic data that came out earlier this morning from ADP. We got the first look at the September jobs numbers. Remember, ADP always announces their estimate on the Wednesday prior to the Friday, where we get the official estimates from the Labor Department. And their number came in a little bit stronger than expected. They estimate that the U.S. added 91,000 jobs in September. I think the consensus was for about 75,000. We'll see what happens on Friday when we get more official numbers. Of course, all these jobs are coming from the service sector, so we're still not adding the type of jobs that we need. We're adding more consumers, but we're not adding more producers, so we're just going to put even more strains on our economy by creating the wrong kinds of jobs. And, of course, the wrong kinds of jobs are being created because of government policy. Hey, I mentioned also yesterday that I was going to be on the Stossel show yesterday. It's aired today. It's going to be on today at 10 p.m. Eastern time on Fox Business. One thing I wish I had said on that interview, sometimes it's it's live to tape. You don't say necessarily what you want to say right away. And Stossel brought up a survey. This guy was trying to say that businesses don't worry about regulations, that regulations and taxes are not a major concern of business owners. Of course, I asked him, well, do you own any businesses? And he said no, he's never owned a business. So that's why he doesn't understand how the problem that regulations and taxes create. But he pointed to a survey that showed that the number one thing that small business owners were worried about was sales, and that regulation and taxes were 2 and 3. Well, I didn't get a chance. I should have pointed out, yeah, but if you added regulations and taxes together, combined, more business owners were worried about taxes and regulations than they were about sales. But what I also should have pointed out is, of course, businesses are worried about sales. They're supposed to worry about sales. I mean, we always want business owners to worry about their sales. They have to maximize their revenue, otherwise they'll go out of business. So it's a good thing if small business owners are worried about sales. What we don't want them to have to worry about is taxes and regulations, because that takes their focus off sales. So rather than, he was trying to use this survey to prove that the most important thing is sales, not taxes and regulation. It actually proved the reverse. That's the only thing I think businesses should be worried about is their sales and their customers and how to get more sales. I don't want them to have to focus on taxes and regulations. Instead, that's the problem. And I wish I really would have made that point on this interview. I kind of blew that opportunity. I think, I think the rest of the interview was pretty good, but, sometimes you don't necessarily think of the best response when you don't have a lot of time to talk or think about it. Now, if I'd have been shown this survey in advance of the show, I might have actually had a chance to formulate a better response. But anyway, on this Occupy Wall Street versus the Tea Party, this is the fork in the road that I think we are going to be looking at when we have this collapse, because the Tea Party movement, on the one hand, represents people who are fed up with big government, who want to return to freedom and the Constitution and recognize government as the problem. The Occupy Wall Street wants to completely abandon the free market and embrace socialism. They want even more government than we have today. They want government providing more and doing more. And so that's ultimately going to be the fork in the road. Do we go back to freedom, or do we complete the journey to serfdom? And we'll see how much more support and how much bigger this Occupy Wall Street movement gets. It's certainly getting a lot of press right now. There are protests now all over the country. And we'll see whether this fades away or continues to gather momentum. But ultimately, I think these are going to be the two alternatives that we have, especially when we get the real economic collapse that hasn't even begun yet. Anyway, another very interesting topic I wanted to weigh in on is, and I mentioned it on the earlier show, but now it's getting a lot more media, is Bank of America's decision to charge $5 a month for people who use their debit cards to make purchases during that month, wants to charge them. And, of course, there's all this uproar. And the fee, of course, is being charged because the government came in and capped how much the banks can charge merchants when people use debit cards. And so since they can't charge the merchants, they've got to charge the debit holders directly. After all, the banks have to make money on these things. They're not nonprofit organizations. They're not supplying people with debit cards for free. It's a product, it's a service that they're selling, and they have to be paid one way or another. But the outrage is, crazy how politicians, they think nothing about taxing us, taking thousands and thousands of dollars away from the typical American in taxes. Yet if a bank tries to charge $5 a month, they're up in arms. But anyway, here's typical. This is, I'm going to play cut number 5. This is Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois. Listen to what he has to say. Cut 5.
Bank of America customers, vote with your feet. Get the heck out of that bank. Find yourself a bank or credit union that won't gouge you for $5 a month and still will give you a debit card that you can use every single day.
Okay, first of all, if everybody did leave Bank of America, would the government be on the hook for a lot of money? Because they bail these guys out. I mean, there's a lot of bailout money over there at Bank of America. They're having a lot of trouble as it is without the government that bailed them out now encouraging their customers to leave. I mean, if all of Bank of America's customers left, although if just the customers who are objecting to the $5 a month fee left, it probably wouldn't hurt Bank of America. They're probably losing some money on those transactions right now. Well, look, the bottom line is, a few years ago, there were no debit cards, right? And how did people spend money, right? They had to go to the bank, and get cash. They could get cash out of an ATM machine with their debit card, and then they can take the cash to a merchant. They can still do that for free. Bank of America is saying if you use your ATM card, your debit card at an ATM machine to get cash, and then you take that cash to a store and spend it, there's no fee. They only want to charge you a fee if you decide not to go to the ATM machine, yet to use your debit card directly at a merchant. Well, there's a value for that convenience. Right, when people don't have to go find an ATM machine and take out cash, if they could just use the debit card at a merchant directly, that saves time. There's obviously a cost there. No, there's no, interest. When you use a credit card, the bank makes money because if you don't pay it back in time, they charge you interest. But there is no interest on a debit card. The only way that banks make money off of debit cards is in the fees that they charge for people to use them. And so they have to charge something. I mean, and here the government is making a huge deal out of a fee. It's $5 a month. It is not a big fee. And, if somebody doesn't want to pay the $5 a month, if someone thinks that $5 a month is so expensive that they can't afford it, they don't have to pay it. They can go to the ATM machine and get the cash. And presumably, if $5 a month represents that big a chunk of your budget, then probably it doesn't matter to you that you've got to spend an extra 5 or 10 minutes going to the ATM machine. But if you don't have the extra time because you're busy and because you're working, then probably $5 is worth it for the convenience of not having to go down to an ATM machine and maybe wait in line, I don't know, or get your cash. So the whole thing is ridiculous. But Bank of America obviously would not be charging this. I mean, where's the outrage? What about the airlines? The airlines are charging people to check their luggage. Why aren't congressmen jumping all over the airlines for charging money to check luggage? Or what about charging money for a meal on a plane? I mean, why are the banks so special? Why do all the politicians have to rail on the banks, jump on this bandwagon because Bank of America wants to charge $5 a month for a service that it provides that people can easily not use if they don't want? Anyway, look, I'm out of time on this segment. We got a guest coming up, so stick around. You got a lot more of the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com. Back here at SchiffRadio.com, and joining me now is my guest, Christian Adams. Christian is author of the just released Injustice, Exposing the Racial Agenda of the Obama Justice Department. I'm actually holding a copy of the book up for those of you who do have the video connection. And he is a former member of the Justice Department himself. Anyway, Christian, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
Okay, so first of all, the racial agenda of the Obama Justice Department, that's a pretty harsh criticism. What are the facts that you have to back up the fact that the Justice Department now has a racial rather than a judicial agenda?
Well, the case after case after case in the book describes this. I mean, there's so many. Let's talk about a couple. New York and Dayton, Ohio. This Justice Department under Eric Holder has forced these places, cities, to hire police officers and firefighters who actually fail the entrance exam but are minorities. In other words, even if you can't pass to become a police officer or firefighter in Dayton and New York City, the Justice Department is forcing these places to hire you anyhow. I mean,
but is this new? I mean, didn't we have this kind of affirmative action type programs before? I mean, does this represent a departure from previous administrations trying to force affirmative action programs?
Yes, because the Supreme Court has since overruled them as unconstitutional in the Ricci case versus the Stefano a couple of years ago. So yes, there has been a change in the law, but this Justice Department has decided to ignore a Supreme Court precedent when it involves race and it involves race-based preferences. So yes, there has been a change. Because
how are they getting away with it? I mean, how are they forcing these local governments to do something that has already been ruled unconstitutional?
Well, because they know that places like Dayton and New York City are not going to fight back as aggressively as they could. I mean, they know that it takes years for a case to wind its way up to the Supreme Court before they can reverse these policies. That's how.
Although, why would they have to go back to the Supreme Court? If the Supreme Court has already ruled, the whole idea is that that's law, and the lower courts would recognize that and side in favor of these towns. They don't have to go back to the Supreme Court all over again if the issue has already been decided.
Well, that's nice, but it doesn't work that way in reality. In reality, you have to fight and claw every step of the way. But that's just one example. I mean, the book is full of others. You have a case in Harlingen, Texas, where there was an illegal election about to take place, and the Justice Department had the law to stop it, which they did during the Bush administration, this kind of illegal election. And the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, in meetings at the department, which I detail in the book Injustice, said, you know what, we're not going to do anything about this. Let's just see if the right candidate wins based on their skin color. And this took place in Harlingen, Texas in 2009, completely lawless. And they waited around to see if the right race won the election before they decided they would enforce the law. I mean,
it didn't matter. It didn't matter what party they were or what the candidate was. What the right winner meant the right race. That was the basic criteria that they had.
That's right. And if the wrong race won, if a white person won or somebody they didn't like as far as their race goes, they would have gone to federal court to have the election results overturned because it was an illegal election in the first place. So that's just another example. I go through example after example in the book where sordid racial criteria are deciding policy decisions at this justice.
Well, how are they coming into a town and forcing them, let's say, to hire a policeman or a fireman who has failed the exam? And are they looking at the exact racial makeup of the police department? And if it's not identical to the racial makeup of the community, they're forcing this type of action? Or
well, this gets into the particulars of employment law, but what they basically do is they use what's called a disparate impact theory. And the disparate impact theory is a more radical application of employment law, and it goes something like this. If you give a test that's objective and fair on its face, there's no questions like, that have racial connotations. Just these tests have like pictures of burning buildings with one window with fire coming out and the other with none, and it says which window is more likely to have fire. I mean, that's a real question on this test. And people fail the test, and more minorities as a percentage fail it than white. A disparate impact theory gives the Justice Department the reason in their mind to go in and sue places because more minorities are failing this test. And so they think that that's enough to force them to hire the minorities who failed an otherwise objective test.
Yeah, so even though I know the old argument used to have been, hey, these tests are socially biased. And, of course, it reminds me of that old Saturday Night Live skit with Garrett Morris, where there's a question about, if you have a formal invitation and then you have to go by the country club, how do you dress, or, do you wear, and it's fun. And then the last answer is take the A train uptown. And of course, that's the one that Garrett Morris picks. And of course, but there's no social bias at all in these tests. And so, if the minority applicants are not doing as well, it's not because they're minorities. It's just because they're just not as bright. And who do we want do we want firemen who can't even figure out where the fire is?
Yeah, I mean, look, America was built on the principle of equal protection in the law. Everyone's treated equally regardless of their race. This Justice Department has taken a completely upside-down approach to this. It's unconstitutional, and it's the sort of things Americans thought we were past when President Obama was elected.
Yeah, and I guess what you're saying is the cities and towns, especially in these tough economic times, their budgets are already strained. They don't have the resources to fight, so it really is a shakedown. It's like a legal blackmail, and the Justice Department comes in and just forces these towns to do what they want with a legal gun to their head.
And don't forget, it also is extending to things like mortgage lending. It's also extending to things like foreclosure. It doesn't take a large leap of logic to say, wait a minute, you're foreclosing on minorities in greater percentages. That's why this Justice Department has set up a racial mortgage foreclosure lending task force inside the Housing and Civil Enforcement section to strong-arm mortgage lenders into stopping foreclosure activities because, once again, there's a racially disparate impact. They're actually suing looking at schools for school discipline policies.
Well, the ultimate irony here is a lot of these mortgages were made to minorities because the government forced the banks to do it. The government forced them to loan the minority applicants even though they weren't creditworthy. So it makes sense that those applicants, those non-creditworthy borrowers who are disproportionately minorities are disproportionately being hit by the foreclosure process. So it's got nothing to do with the race. It has everything to do with the fact that people who couldn't afford houses were forced to buy them, and now they're obviously ending in foreclosure. But the race has nothing to do with it, other than the fact that it was the government that forced them to loan to minorities that were not creditworthy.
You're exactly right, and let's make this perfectly clear. This Justice Department is taking the approach, therefore, to prevent these lenders from foreclosing, essentially shifting wealth to people based on their skin color. If that's not a racial agenda, I don't know what is.
And, of course, what's going to backfire is, once again, banks will be less likely to want to loan to minorities if they know that, hey, if I make a loan to a minority, the government's not going to let me foreclose. So it actually ends up backfiring and tightens credit for minorities in the future, because now they know that they're going to be punished if they have to foreclose. So now they have to make even more sure that that doesn't happen, which means even tighter lending standards for people who are in these groups.
It's a spiral that keeps going. Look at school discipline policies. They're taking the same racial disparate impact theory and applying it to school discipline. That if there's a greater percentage of minority disciplined in school, then it must be a racial problem. It must be discriminatory. One issue after another, they're using race as a criteria.
Of course, and then that actually is a self-perpetuating moral hazard, because if you basically say, hey, if you're a minority and you do something wrong, then you're going to get a less severe punishment than a white guy that does something wrong, then you simply encourage more of that behavior because you remove the negative consequence to the behavior.
Exactly right. Now, listen, I cannot overstate the power of this agency over the economy. People don't understand, and I write about this in Injustice in the book, they do not understand the immense power that the Civil Rights Division at DOJ has over businesses, whether it's them blocking the Amazon Kindle launch, which I write about in the book because it didn't have Braille buttons on the talking button, whether it's hotels, mortgage lenders, insurance companies, movie theaters, restaurants. They have undercover operations to investigate hotels and restaurants and apartment complexes around the country. This division that I write about in Injustice has more power over the economy than almost any other division in the federal government. So it's something that people need to understand, the level of corruption and lawlessness.
Yeah, I mentioned on the show yesterday, and I guess this is part of the Justice Department, this lawsuit that was just filed against a U.S. company because they claimed that a 600-pound individual that they fired was fired solely on the basis of their obesity, and now they're suing them for it.
The Civil Rights Division, that's what I write about in Injustice.
Yeah, so somehow, being overweight is now a protected class, and now, companies, you have to weigh your employees before you fire them, and if they weigh a certain amount, you better be careful, because if you fire them, you might end up with a lawsuit. I mean, that means, hey, don't hire any overweight people in the first place, because, hey, if you have to let one of them go, look out, you might find yourself on the other end of a legal gun. Anyway, we'll continue this discussion after the break. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. Department. If the government's going to come in and force these cities to hire, let's say, a minority firefighters who fail the exams, those jobs come at the expense of, let's say, a white applicant who otherwise would have been hired, who was more competent, but is now denied that job based solely on the color of his skin.
Well, that's exactly right, and it harms the level of quality in the police force and the fire department. You don't want to have police officers who fail exams. You have exams for a reason, and to make race the base of hiring is dangerous. It's not just illegal; it harms public safety, and that's what's so outrageous about this shift in policy.
Yeah, I mean, would they allow this? What about for air traffic controllers? What about for pilots? I mean, would the government say, hey, I want you to hire pilots that flunk a flying exam? Would you want to fly on that plane? And if they did that, if you saw a black pilot, you might not even want to get on. You might be afraid. But does he really know how to fly?
Yeah, that's the other danger, is this demeans everybody. When one of the great things about this country is that it gives people equal opportunity to do their best based on their merit. That's what our economy is supposed to be based on. That's what our law is supposed to be based on. And these sorts of changes in policy that I describe in Injustice is really harms that long tradition in this country.
Yeah, and I think the people who I think should be outraged the most would be, let's say, the black who's competent, who passes the exam on his own. He now is going to be diminished because now he's got like a chip on his shoulders, because the other people on the force, they might think, hey, maybe you flunked the exam. Maybe the only reason you have this job is because of the color of your skin. And so now there's a prejudice against him that wouldn't otherwise exist. In fact, these laws are actually creating a more of a racist society than would be without these laws, because they're causing people to doubt the competence of people who are minorities who have jobs, because they have no idea, did you get the job because of your competence or because of the color of your skin?
Well, that's one of the messages in my book, Injustice, is that this DOJ Civil Rights Division is tinkering in so many ways with the free market of labor, of capital, of housing, in ways all based on racial criteria. And people just underestimate the power of this agency. Most people don't even know about it. The Civil Rights Division, what is that? It's huge. I mean, I list the companies that have been sued by this organization. Let's take Adams Mark Hotels. Adams Mark Hotels was sued by an attorney named Charlotte Jackson in the Housing and Civil Enforcement section. They were sued for purported racial discrimination. I describe how Ms. Jackson thinks that the word picnic, like we all go and have chicken and so forth, she thinks that it's a racist term, and she bans the use of it in planning housing section events. They can't have picnics in the housing section at the Justice Department because this attorney thinks it's a racist term. Well, this is the same racially paranoid attorney who's suing businesses like Adams Mark Hotel for racial discrimination. I detail the people involved in this sort of policy. And
now, who are they claiming was discriminated against in this hotel case? Is it the employees or the customers?
Customers who came in, African American customers who were treated differently.
What would be the justification? I mean, if you're running a hotel, right? I can't think of any reason that the hotel owner would discriminate based on the color of the skin of people who are willing to rent out a room. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. They're trying to make money. They'd have no incentive to discriminate based on race. Now, they might have an incentive to discriminate based on other criteria, and maybe the reason that some black person might have been denied a room wasn't because they were black. There might have been some other legitimate reason that they had. Yet, now they've got to defend themselves from these crazy suits.
Well, that's exactly why you can't have attorneys enforcing this area of the law who have enormous power on how to view evidence, how to build a case, who are from the far fringes. And I describe how this Justice Department has hired 130 new attorneys from the far fringes of racial animosity to start enforcing federal laws relating to businesses. And so
that's why, it's my opinion that we should have none of these laws, that, we should just allow the market to punish people who discriminate and reward people who don't. The government comes in with all these laws, and now they create an incentive to discriminate because people want to mitigate lawsuits. I think we have more racially based discrimination because of the laws against discrimination than we would have if we repealed all the laws.
Well, and when you have radical attorneys, and I name names in the book Injustice who these people are, when you have radical attorneys enforcing these laws, the external effects are even worse.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any other specific examples of these civil rights-based lawsuits?
Yeah, and let me tell you about upstate New York. The Justice Department filed a lawsuit against a school district in upstate New York because children, a couple of children were coming to school, male boys dressed as transvestites. They wore high heels, stilettos, pink wigs, mini skirts, and the school said, you can't do this. This is just totally inappropriate. And the Justice Department sued the school district to force them to accommodate these child transvestites.
Well, how could they be transvestites when they're just, they're 10?
15.
50, but I don't even think, I don't even think they would allow women to come dressed that provocatively in stiletto heels, and I mean, they probably wouldn't even let girls dress that way, let alone boys. But like the Justice Department does anything better to do? Then schools could be able to have any dress code they want.
Peter, this is one of example after example after example I list out in injustice of what's going on now in the Holder Justice Department. Over and over and over again, this is happening.
And of course, if we tell the schools, look, you have no control over how your kids dress. I mean, look at private schools. I mean, they have a uniform. Yet they're saying, I know when I was in school, you can't, you have to have your girls' skirts had to be a certain length. I mean, they wouldn't let you even come with really long hair. They want to make sure that, but now they're saying anything goes.
Yeah, and they're claiming it's called gender identity discrimination. It's what people think their gender is, even if it's not really their gender. If the school does not accommodate the 15-year-olds in the mini skirts and wigs, then they're discriminating against that child's gender identity perception. I'm not kidding. This is really a case. You can read about it in my book, Injustice.
Yeah, well, all the injustice is happening at the Justice Department and other government agencies under the guise of justice. Anyway, hey, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for writing the book. This is important information that needs to get out. Everybody else will be back. We got another full hour coming up at the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com.
855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
Your freedom.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back. This is Peter Schiff. Hour 2 of the Peter Schiff Show is underway. We're taking calls 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. I noticed some of the people who were on hold before the guest came on have dropped off, so probably a good time to call back. Before we brought our guest on, I started talking about this Bank of America, this outrage about the $5 fee. And, some of the interesting quotes I read, one of the congressmen had said that they were accusing Bank of America of trying to make money off the backs of its customers. Imagine that. Imagine a business trying to make money from its customers. I mean, isn't that why the businesses exist? To make money from their customers? I mean, are they going to vilify all businesses for trying to make a profit off their customers? I mean, are businesses supposed to be nonprofit entities that just want to break even off their customers? I mean, the whole thing is nonsense. In fact, I even got some sound, too, from Obama, who was on ABC News with George Stephanopoulos. He was being asked about this question and weighed in kind of supporting the idea that no, the banks really don't have a right to make a profit. Or he didn't come right out and say that he wanted to ban it, but listen to how he responds. This is cut number 9.
Can you stop this service charge?
Well, you can stop it because if you say to the banks, you don't have some inherent right just to get a certain amount of profit. If your customers are being mistreated, that you have to treat them fairly and transparently. And my hope is that you're going to see a bunch of the banks who say to themselves, you know what, this is actually not good business practice. Banks can make money, they can succeed the old-fashioned way, by earning it, by lending to small businesses, by lending to consumers, by making sure that we are building the economy together.
So, I mean, part of what he's saying is correct in that if the free market wants to render a verdict that these fees are excessive, then let the market do it. But the president is wrong. They do have a right to pursue a profit and make as much profit as the free market will allow them to make. Now, if they really are gouging their customers with a $5 a month service charge, if there really is a lot of excess profits there, then other banks will advertise the fact that they charge nothing for this service, and people will switch their accounts from Bank of America to these other banks. Now, if there aren't a bunch of other banks that are saying, hey, we'll give the service for free, it's because there isn't a lot of profit in giving away this service. In fact, more banks will probably follow suit and charge a fee. I'm sure that Bank of America made a decision that, hey, if somebody doesn't want to pay this $5 a month, we just assume that they transfer their account to a bank that doesn't want to charge them. Maybe there's a bank that has a different cost structure that can more economically afford these customers. Bank of America understands that. Now, maybe there's going to be some publicity a backdrop against the bank. But they know all this stuff. This is a free competitive market. They're not the only bank that offers a debit card. But, the problem is the government came in and said, hey, you can't recoup the cost of these debit cards through the merchants. Well, charging the merchants was simply an indirect way of charging their customers anyway, because they obviously would pass these fees along to their customers in terms of the prices that they charge for their products. But if the bank says, look, you can't recoup your costs through this avenue, then they're going to look for another way of doing it. And they're going to feign outrage. The whole thing is ridiculous. But again, it's a way for politicians to try to get votes, to look like they're on our side by railing against the banks for charging us something. Meanwhile, they're charging a fortune for this protection. To have the government protect us from a $5 a month fee, how much money are they taking from the pockets of the typical Bank of America customer? Take a look at your payroll taxes, your FICA taxes, your income taxes. What would you rather have? That tax money back? And pay the $5 a month, or have the government save you from that $5, but at the cost of all the money you're paying in federal taxes. I got some more sound from Obama that I'm going to play again, where he is attacking the rich and claiming that the rich are not paying their fair share, and that what they have to do to help the economy is pay more taxes. Playing down the fact that just by running businesses, producing products, hiring people, that in and of itself helps the economy a lot more than paying taxes. In fact, if the rich pay more taxes, that means they have less wealth available to grow their businesses and to hire people. So the more money the rich pay in taxes, the worse the economy is going to be, not the better. That's the irony of it. But let me take a quick break, and I want to take a couple of phone calls, and then I'll play some of that sound. First up is going to be Jack, who's calling in from is that Los Angeles or Louisiana?
Louisiana.
Okay.
Yes, what?
Peter?
Yes,
yeah.
I'm a Euro Pacific customer and Perth Mint, and I have a question. I can understand how the stimulus adds money supply and an increase in prices. But can you explain how quantitative easing does that, in the sense that quantitative easing, the way I understand it, is they're providing liquidity to the banks, but if the banks are unable to lend to qualified customers, how does that money get?
No, well, quantitative easing is not liquidity to the banks. It's liquidity to the federal government. Under quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve is buying treasuries. They are monetizing debt. So the liquidity goes to the government. So it's enabling the government to borrow money at a very, very low rate of interest because it is borrowing it from the Federal Reserve. Where does the Federal Reserve get the money that it is loaning to the government? It prints it. It creates out of thin air. And so quantitative easing is just a euphemism for debt monetization. It is pure inflation. It is precisely why the founding fathers didn't want us to have paper money because they didn't want the government to just be able to print money and spend it. And that is, in effect, what is going on when the Fed is cooperating with the Treasury in monetizing its debt. And so that is the pure definition of inflation.
Well, I see. In other words, instead of the government having to borrow from, let's say, the Chinese, which would take dollars out of the marketplace, they create money and give the government more money to spend without taking any out.
Well, they don't have to borrow it from the Chinese or the Saudis or some other American, whoever might have loaned it. And so what it does, though, is it makes interest rates lower than they otherwise would have been, but it increases the domestic money supply because money is being created out of thin air. So if there was a private buyer for dollars, then the money supply wouldn't grow. But when the Fed is the buyer, it can only buy by growing the money supply. So it's much more inflationary when the government sells bonds to the Fed than if it sells it to an independent third party that is not printing the money to pay for the bonds. Anyway, we will be back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com. We are back, and I'm going to take another phone call, this time from Aaron calling from Cincinnati, from Vancouver.
Vancouver, BC.
Yeah. Aaron, what's on your mind?
I just had a quick question about, trading mining stocks. I got clobbered, obviously, this week. And I was doing some calculations last night that if I sold now at a marginal loss and then rebought in, I'm going to be getting 3 times more stock and only losing, a couple $1,000. Is that an effective strategy in your opinion, or?
Well, I don't even understand. You're saying if you sold and then bought back, you would get more shares. How is that possible? If you sell and buy back, aren't you going to have the same number of shares as you sold?
No, because I sell it all, and then I'm buying back at a lower price, right? So
but you're also selling at a lower price. I don't understand how you could do that. If you sell, you're going to sell at the price today. That's the same price you're buying at.
Yeah, but I'm buying more shares when I buy back, though, right? Because I bought it.
No, you're not. You're not buying. You're buying the exact same number of shares.
Well, I don't see how that's possible because I'm selling less.
No, you're selling whatever you have. If you're selling, if you bought 1,000 shares of stock and the price is cut in half, and then you sell those 1,000 shares of stock for half of what you originally paid, and then you go back and buy, you're only going to be able to afford the same 1,000 shares. In fact, you're going to afford maybe a little bit less because you got to pay the commissions on the sell of the buy. The strategy doesn't make sense at all.
Okay, all right, I see what you're saying then.
Yeah, the only time sometimes people do that is if they want to generate a tax loss. Let's say you have a taxable gain and you want to sell some gold stocks to generate a loss to offset that gain. That makes sense. Now, in order to avoid the wash rule, you would have to buy back different shares than the ones that you sold, or you'd have to wait 30 days. But obviously you're a Canadian, so I'm not sure what the tax laws are up there, but you probably have something similar. But that would be the only reason that you would do something like that. It would be a tax-related transaction. Otherwise, the only person that you're helping is your broker, who gets to charge you a commission when you buy and sell. But other than that, there's no real advantage to you. Now, if somebody had tried to time the market and they had sold their gold stocks a couple of weeks ago and then bought them back, yeah, well then then they can get back more shares than they sold. But that's because they timed the market right. But if you're trying to make the buys and the sells at the exact same time, there is no real way to profit from that. Okay, anyway, well, thanks for your call. Anyway, I want to get back to some of these Obama quotes from one of them is from a fundraiser where President Obama was speaking in Dallas, Texas, trying to claim that the rich need to pay more to give back to the country and do their fair share. Anyway, here this is at cut number 6.
We should pay our fair share in taxes to contribute to the nation that made our success possible. And you know what? I think most wealthy Americans would agree with that if it helps us grow the economy and it helps to bring down our deficits. Now, this notion that, folks are inherently selfish, that's just not true. But you got to ask them, right? People don't voluntarily pay taxes. But if you ask most wealthy folks here in Dallas or around the country, they'll tell you, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm doing my share for America to succeed.
See, they are doing their share. That's their point. Not only are they paying more than their fair share of taxes, but they're doing more of their fair share of the work that makes the economy grow. See, the president's got the cart before the horse. It's not the U.S. economy that enables businesses to thrive. It's thriving businesses that enable the U.S. economy to succeed. The source of all the tax revenue is the entrepreneurs and the businesses that go out there and grow the economy, that create the jobs, that provide the services, that produce the goods that we all consume. That is what drives the economy. And in fact, the president even said at the beginning of that little clip, he said that people shouldn't object to paying more taxes if those extra taxes will grow the economy and reduce the deficit. The fact of the matter is they will do the reverse. By diverting money from private businesses to government, that undermines the economy. And there is no basis for saying that higher taxes will shrink the deficit. Higher taxes will simply be spent by the government, and the deficits will keep on growing. So based on the president's initial premise that higher taxes will grow the economy, reduce the deficit. They won't. They will do the reverse, which is another reason why businesses would oppose higher taxes. But here's really this is really the icing on the cake, where you have Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama trying to claim that Ronald Reagan would be in his corner, that Ronald Reagan would support his new millionaire tax. The Buffett rule is really a revisionist form of history. But here's how the president tries to twist this into trying to claim Ronald Reagan as a tax raiser. Here, cut number 7.
Now, some Republicans in Congress, they're already dusting off their old records. That's class warfare. Let me tell you something. 26 years ago, some of you may have seen this on television. Clips been circulating. 26 years ago, another president said that some of these tax loopholes, and I quote, made it possible for millionaires to pay nothing while a bus driver was paying 10% of his salary, and that's crazy. It's time we stopped it. That was 26 years ago. You know the name of that president? Ronald Reagan. So, was that class warfare?
Well, here's the big difference, right, between Reagan and Obama. Reagan was cutting taxes. Obama is raising taxes. Now, Reagan would have look, if Reagan thought he could have eliminated the income tax, he would have. But he had to start. When he came to office, the top rate was 70%. He had a lot of work to do. The fact that there were points during the Reagan administration where the taxes were higher than they were today, it's not because Ronald Reagan wanted them there. Ronald Reagan did his best to lower the taxes as much as he could. In fact, Obama is actually really trying to claim that taxes were higher under Reagan than they are under Obama. Therefore, Reagan wanted them higher and would somehow object to the low rates of taxes that exist today. Here, he continues with this as cut number 8.
By the way, taxes are much lower now than they ever were when Ronald Reagan was president. I know a lot of folks have short memories, but I don't remember Republicans accusing Ronald Reagan of being a socialist or engaging in class warfare because he thought that everybody should do their fair share. And things have just gotten out of whack. I tell you what, if asking a billionaire to pay the same tax rate as a plumber or a teacher or a bus driver makes me a warrior for the middle class, I will wear that charge with honor. Because the only warfare I've seen is the battle waged against middle class Americans for a decade now. And they're hurting, and they need some help.
Yeah, well, what about the battle Barack Obama is waging with the truth? I mean, first of all, his statement that taxes were never lower under the Reagan presidency is just not true. I mean, Reagan, when he came to office, the top rate was 70%. When he left, the top rate was down at 28%. Today, the top rate is 35%, plus the Medicare tax now goes for 100% of your income. That was not the case when Reagan was president. It phased out at a lower level. So the real effective top federal rate right now is 38%. And when Reagan left office, it was 28%. So the top rate is 35% higher today than it was when Ronald Reagan left office. Now, is it true that when Ronald Reagan first came to office, taxes were higher? Yes, but that was a problem that Reagan inherited, and it's a problem that he tried to solve. He wanted to reduce the marginal rate of taxes, and now Obama is trying to use Reagan to justify big increases in the same marginal rate. Hey, that dog won't hunt, Obama. Anyway, we will be right back. We got a lot more of the show coming up. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We got some open lines if you want to call 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. And well, I want to take another moment to talk about the latest pump and dump scam being perpetuated by the National Inflation Association. Again, I'm going to talk about the stock they're pumping and dumping. I'm not making any investment recommendations regarding this stock or any of their other suggestions. I'm simply alerting the public to a fraudulent pump and dump scheme and also using it as an example to explain how this classic fraud works. and how this organization continues to get away with it right under the nose of the SEC. You know, the SEC spends all their time harassing legitimate businessmen. Meanwhile, complete fraudsters are allowed to operate right under their nose, despite the fact that they have been, pointed out. I've pointed out on numerous occasions what's going on. They continue to allow this crime to be committed. The latest one, and this is the funny thing about this one, is that the NIA in their email pump piece, they actually tell their subscribers what they're doing. This time they actually fess up, although I don't think it's 100% honest. But they actually tell their subscribers they have a big position that they're down on, and that if they get back to break even, they're going to dump their shares. Yet people are buying it anyway. Anyway, the latest pump and dump is a stock called Ocean Power Tech, symbol OPTT, in the U.S. And of course, it's a thinly traded stock, which is ideal for the pump and dump. But here's the funny part. The National Inflation Association claims they have about 177,000 shares that they purchased at an average price of, I think, $326. Now, the only way they can have an average price that low, basically, is if they bought the stock last week. I mean, realistically, that's really the only time the stock is traded, even under that price. It did trade below 320 for a couple of days, I think 2 days back in August, but I doubt that NIA happened to buy all their stock right on that low. So it's very likely that they just bought the stock last week. Now, if they just bought all this stock last week, why would they want to get out if they could break even? I mean, they talk about this stock. It's the greatest stock ever. It's one of the most undervalued stocks in the market today. If that really is the case, and if they bought it last week and they're now down about 50%, trying to get reelected, Anyway, so I don't know where that noise came from. So if they bought this stock last week, obviously they wouldn't want to sell it at break even the following week. The only reason that could have justified NIA buying these 177,000 shares last week is if they knew in advance that they were going to sell them once they put out the pump and dump. Now, maybe they didn't expect the stock to drop so much while they were buying it. Maybe they kind of got caught, and instead of making a profit, they're just trying to get out of jail and break even. But the bottom line is they bought the shares knowing that they were going to send out an email blast to their database, trying to get their database to buy the shares that they already owned so they can sell them. And they're actually telling the database that their intention is to sell the stock as soon as they get even. Well, I mean, why would anybody be dumb enough to buy stock when the guy recommending it is telling you that he's going to dump his shares as soon as he gets his money back? And if the stock is so undervalued, why would they sell? So they're actually fessing up that it's a pump and dump scheme. And, of course, they sent out the pump and dump piece yesterday, and the stock jumped up yesterday by about 20-30%. And, of course, they sent out another piece today trying to brag about the fact that the stock that they recommended was up 20 or 30%, as if their readers actually had any profit from that gap. No, the big gap, that's what they paid. The stock opened 20 or 30% higher. The people who got the recommendation, they didn't get to buy it before it went up. They had to pay the higher price. And to show how this works, there's two other pump and dump stocks that I have talked about on this show. The first one was the stock Mega Precious Metals, and they pumped and pumped and pumped this stock repeatedly. When they first recommended it, the stock was about 35 cents, but nobody could buy it there. That was where it was before they sent out the pump and dump. As soon as it opened up, the stock gapped up to about 60 cents. And they pumped the stock at 60 cents. They kept pumping it and pumping it. The most recent pump piece came when the stock was above 90 cents, at 93 cents. And of course, now the stock is at 45 cents, which means that anybody who bought this stock based on the NIA recommendation, if they still own it, they are down. Some people are down by better than 50%. Of course, when the stock was at 93 cents, they were still claiming credit for this huge gain, but nobody had sold it. They kept telling their members, buy, 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 don't sell. Meanwhile, they're selling it, I bet, or whoever paid them has been selling the stock. Meanwhile, now the stock is at 45 cents, which is lower than what anybody might have paid for it. The same thing with their other pump and dump, this GRO. When they first recommended that stock, it was about 90 cents. No, the day before they sent out their recommendation, it closed at $1.17, but it gapped up to $1.58 the very next day, so their subscribers paid $1.58. The stock did go down as low as 65 cents. Then it rallied, and they did a second pump and dump when the stock was at $1.93. Their readers paid, and now the stock is falling and it's back down to $1.10. But they constantly use the fact that the stock goes up to trying to validate the legitimacy of the investment, when the stock going up is simply a function of a bunch of people rushing into an illiquid stock. The problem is going to happen when the people that own all these shares actually want to get out. Then what's going to happen? Who's going to buy when all the NIA members try to sell? See, right now, they never sell because all the NIA does is pump the stocks up and tell people buy, buy, buy. They never tell people to sell because the people who are selling, it's either their clients who are paying them. And I don't think NIA is being paid directly. I think that if there's a payment that's being made, it's being made to Jonathan Levitt and Gerard Adams through their stock promotion businesses. So they get paid through their stock promotion businesses, and then they can claim that nobody is paying the NIA. Well, maybe that's technically true. No one is paying the NIA, but people who are affiliated with the NRA are getting paid through other entities. And, of course, sometimes they say that NIA doesn't have any stock, but they don't disclaim whether any NIA affiliates own any stock. But, again, the crazy thing about this latest pump and dump is they actually come right out and say that they've got a bunch of stock that they're going to sell if they ever could break even. And, in fact, the stock yesterday actually rallied all the way up to 324, which was about 1 or 2 pennies below where they said they were going to dump their shares, although there's nothing that says that they have to wait for 326. I mean, they might already be selling. In fact, they might own a more significant position than they acknowledged because they didn't say how much they own personally or how much other entities they control might own, and they could be selling. They've got a big money machine right now as long as they have a bunch of suckers that are going to buy these illiquid stocks just because they say how great they are. In fact, if you remember, the last time when they were pumping mega precious metals, they said this was the most undervalued stock in history, and they will never recommend any other stocks as long as this stock is so cheap. Well, meanwhile, mega precious metals is cheaper today than it was when they sent out that email blast saying they would never recommend another stock until this one went up. Meanwhile, they're recommending all kinds of stocks, despite the fact that mega precious metals is lower than it was at the point where they said that they would never recommend one. But of course, a lot of the real losses have left to happen. Who knows how low some of these stocks would actually fall if the NIA subscribers who own them actually tried to sell. Now, it is certainly possible that some of the NIA members are trading these stocks and got in and out. But obviously, the vast majority of the NIA subscribers who bought these stocks and who paid to buy these stocks still own them. And they still own them at substantial losses. And if they ever try to sell, it's my opinion that the bottom would drop out of these stocks. And but meanwhile, they're making a lot of money, and nobody is doing anything about it. So my advice, again, is be wary of anybody that is writing a promotional piece, promoting a stock, especially if they've been paid to write the piece, or if they come out and actually tell you that they own the stock and they're going to get rid of it. You're their exit strategy. They're looking, NIA is looking for their own subscribers to bail them out of a losing position. They've got stocks at a loss. They want to sell the stocks. They can't find buyers, so they tell their readers what a great deal it is so that they can get rid of their shares to their own subscriber base. Anyway, again, the number to call, 855-4SCHIFF, 855-4SCHIFF. And I wanted to continue playing some of these Barack Obama clips. He was also on ABC this week over the weekend talking with George Stephanopoulos, and probably in one admission that probably is going to be used against him, in his reelection campaign, where he actually admits on the show that Americans are worse off today than they were 4 years ago. In fact, they're a lot more worse off than the president wants to acknowledge, but it's probably a difficult thing for him to admit to. But anyway, here he is. This is cut number 10.
Thanks for joining us live on abcnews.com and yahoo.com for this exclusive interview with President Barack Obama, and thanks for having us to the White House.
Great to be here.
There has been a huge response since we announced this interview. 40,000 questions have come in, as you might imagine, most on the economy,
right,
and a lot of anger out there. There's so many people who simply don't think they're better off than they were 4 years ago. How do you convince them that they are?
Well, I don't think they're better off than they were 4 years ago. They're not better off than they were before Lehman's collapse, before the financial crisis, before this extraordinary recession that we're going through.
So in other words, they're worse off, but he tries to backtrack and try to claim that, well, it's because of the financial crisis. So he's trying to take them back to a point before he became president, like when the Lehman Brothers collapsed and the real estate bubble. But what about the day he was inaugurated, right? I mean, because obviously a 4-year time span, goes before President Obama came to office. But does the president think Americans are better today than the day that he swore the oath of office? And obviously, the 4-year question is going to come, as we get much closer to the actual election, and he won't necessarily be able to go back to that point in time. But if you remember when President Obama was running for office, it wasn't that, hey, things are going to continue to get worse even if you elect me. It was, hey, things are going to turn around. He's going to get in there and solve these problems. Yet now, by his own admission, the situation continues to deteriorate. Now, he's going to try to pretend that, well, it would have been even worse if I hadn't been president. But that's a very, very difficult platform to run on. Things could have been worse. Last time he ran on hope and change. If his platform for 2012 is, hey, it could have been worse, I don't know that that's a winning campaign message. Anyway, we'll be right back. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com. If you want to call 855-4SCHIFF, we still got plenty of open lines if you want to call. The last segment coming up. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. The last segment is here again. If you want to call 855-4SCHIFF, I still don't think we have any calls. I wonder if people are listening or just I don't know what's going on, but we still have much to talk about if nobody calls. I had an email during the break from somebody who's letting me know that the stock that we just talked about, that the National Inflation Association is pumping and dumping, Ocean Power Tech, that Jonathan Lebed actually pumped the exact same stock through his other company, Lebed.biz, which is a professional stock promotion company that I'm sure was paid by Ocean Power to pump up the shares. When they wrote that piece, the stock was at $3, it looks like at $3.10 a share or so, and they said it was the biggest bargain in the stock market. Of course, every stock they tout is the biggest bargain out there, but the stock was at $3.10. Now remember, they're telling their subscribers now to NIA that if the stock can get back up to $3.26, they're going to get out of it. So if the stock was the biggest bargain in the market at $3.10, why would you want to sell it at $3.26? But what happened when they pumped the stock at Lebed.biz, the next day the stock jumped up to $3.63, and then within the next week it got as high as $4.15. That rally was in response to people at Lebed.biz buying the stock. They didn't benefit from that rally. They paid those higher prices. Who benefited was whoever was selling the shares that Jonathan Lebed's company, Lebed.biz, was pumping. And now when the stock had collapsed all the way down to $2.33 2 days ago, they pumped it again, this time not through Lebed.biz, but through inflation.us. Same stock, same story, a different group of suckers who are buying the stock. But these are how these pump and dump operations work. They tout the stock to people, telling you how great it is, you can't lose, the greatest money-making opportunity. Of course, in the fine print, Lebed.biz basically, or Inflation USA says, hey, you can't take anything we're saying for seriously. Don't believe us. This is not an investment recommendation. Do all your own homework. They have all these disclaimers, but of course, in the big print up on the top is, you got to buy this, greatest opportunity of a lifetime. And yet they keep on doing it and doing it and doing it. And unfortunately, too, they continue to get new suckers into their organization. So even though people might have lost money on these earlier pump and dumps, some of the newer people don't realize that. They didn't buy the other stocks. They have no idea. And, of course, the company touts the supposed success of these stocks based on how much they rose immediately after they pumped them. But they don't talk about how much they subsequently fell and how much people who bought the stocks after the run-up are actually losing. And, of course, the real losses are going to come when people try to sell, which basically no one has done at this point. But I want to play a few more of these Obama clips because they really are pretty good. One, again, from this ABC News interview. Amazingly enough, Obama actually admits that he's the underdog to get reelected in 2012. I don't know if a sitting president has ever said that hey, I'm the long shot, I'm the underdog, I'm probably not going to get reelected. I mean, listen to this. This is cut number 13.
The majority of Americans, 55%, think you'll be a one-term president. Are you the underdog now?
Absolutely. Because, given the economy, there's no doubt that, whatever happens on your watch, you've got...
You embrace that pretty quickly.
I don't mind. I'm used to being an underdog. And I think that at the end of the day, though, what people are going to say is, who's got a vision for the future that can actually help ordinary families recapture that American dream?
I don't know, when was Obama the underdog? I mean, he certainly wasn't the underdog when he ran in 2008. I mean, he was the odds-on favorite. There were never any polls that ever had John McCain ahead. I mean, maybe was he the underdog against Hillary Clinton in the primary? I guess he might have been the underdog for a while. I don't even know if he was the underdog back then. So the fact of the matter is that he's the underdog now. I think that's kind of a new experience for the president. But can you imagine a sitting president? Because you're normally, hey, you're the incumbent. I mean, you've got the bully pulpit. You're the president. To say that, hey, you're the underdog, that the incumbency is actually a disadvantage is a pretty startling admission. But hey, one last thing I want to play, and I'll go to the phones, is President Obama trying to claim now that he doesn't even regret the decision to guarantee over $500 million worth of Solyndra debt. I mean, can't he just admit, hey, that was a mistake, gee, I shouldn't have done that? No, he's basically saying, hey, if I had it to do all over again, I'd do the same thing. Listen, cut number 16.
Your White House has faced a lot of questions on Solyndra, the solar panel company you paid a visit to back in 2010. You really held it up then as a model for jobs and clean energy. Do you regret that?
No, I don't, because if you look at the overall portfolio of loan guarantees that have been provided, overall it's doing well. And what we always understood was that not every single business is going to succeed in clean energy. But if we want to compete with China, which is pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into this space, if we want to compete with other countries that are heavily subsidizing the industries of the future, we've got to make sure that our guys here in the United States of America at least have a shot. Now, there are going to be some failures, and Solyndra is an example.
So in other words, he's trying to say, hey, it's okay that Solyndra went bankrupt and taxpayers have lost $500 million because there are still other loans that we've guaranteed that haven't gone bankrupt yet. That's basically all he's saying. He's saying, hey, the rest of the portfolio is doing fine. Well, how do we know? Because remember, all we did is guarantee debt, which means there's really no upside, right? The president is committing taxpayer funds to guarantee debt. So we can't win in this situation, because if the company pays the debt back, it's not the government, the taxpayers don't get any money. The taxpayers just absorb the losses if the companies don't pay the money back. And you have to ask yourself, what kind of companies need governments to guarantee their debts? Well, they're generally companies that couldn't borrow the money without the government guarantees. Now, if they can't borrow the money, why is that? Well, it's because lenders think it's too risky. They think there's a problem at the company, and they don't want to lend. So the fact that Solyndra is the first example of a loan guarantee gone bad doesn't mean it's going to be the last. I mean, if anything, it's evidence that, hey, this is a big problem, and, hey, this is the first domino. But, I mean, there's a whole more that are going to fall. I mean, this is not the last entity that has government-guaranteed debt that's going to fail. You certainly can't claim that the program is success based on the fact that there are still loans that haven't failed yet when, hey, we haven't written the final chapter. Anyway, let me go to the phones. Alex is on hold from Rochester, New York. Alex, you're on.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for taking my call. I've been following you since 2008 and read your books. And actually, I would like to get your opinion. I work for a big U.S. corporation, and I want to take a take on 401k.
Hey, Alex, I guess I apologize. I kind of lost track of the time. I have to. Maybe I can answer that on tomorrow's show. So I appreciate your calling, and if you call again tomorrow, we can talk about it. Everybody, we've come to the end of the 2 hours. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. Bye for now.